What is up everyone, Bearkid here and bringing guys episode 48 of Gears of War lore. Today we're going to be talking about Gears of War Hivebusters number 1. The thing that was kind of funny is they kept talking about the release date for the comic. They kept going back and forth. I don't know when the heck the comic was going to come out, and out of nowhere I get a notification on my tablet telling me that the comic is available to read. So I immediately read it and now I'm bringing you guys another video. So if you guys want to read the comic yourself, you can go ahead and buy it at Amazon.com. That's how I personally did it. And once you buy it, it just immediately downloads to your tablet, smartphone, whichever you want. And honestly, it's a great comic book so far. I personally am liking it a lot. First thing I just want to say before we proceed though is the simple fact that when it comes to it being a brand new comic, I definitely don't want to ruin it entirely. I'm just going to kind of express the story, what's going on, what's happening in it for the most part. And I'm actually going forward when I make these comic videos, I'm actually going to cut out the actual text. So I feel like that's kind of also to help avoid copyright and also just to make it more of a surprise if you do decide to read it. But yeah guys, to go ahead and get us started here, so we can see that Mac is actually falling in the water here. We can see that he's pulling himself up, trying his best to get up, and once he emerges out of the water here, we can see that he is on a battlefield between a lot of fighters, soldiers, and the swarm. So when he's over there fighting, he makes his way to the vehicle here to try to get a weapon, to try to help. But as soon as he does, he gets jumped on by a juvie, and it looks like it could be over for him right there. But right when he's about to get killed, the juvie gets destroyed, and we can see that his friends Lonnie and Keegan have arrived to help him out. So they come in with 3rd Lancers, start going guns blazing. And Lonnie is telling Mac here that we need to leave, this isn't our battle. And Mac basically says, well, it is mine. And he wants to keep helping, but while he's discussing with them, he gets hit by a spike from a snatcher, and he immediately tries to pull it out. Next thing we see is that he's inside a weird like dreamscape, and where he can see his 2 friends and the area that he was in, but now it's completely covered by the tentacles, vines, whatever you want to call them. And he's just sitting there dying due to his wound. And as he's falling in the dreamscape, we can see some arms come through it and pull him out of it. And we can see that it's actually Lonnie, and that he's actually in fact being pulled out of a pod. So this is the one thing I was a little confused on here. I'm gonna go about it a little later when we get to that point. But we saw the battlefield, and then we see the battlefield covered in the tentacles, and then he's pulled out of a pod. And then you can see for the rest of the comic, they don't really mention or even show him having a wound from that spike. So I almost feel like that part with the spike could have been in the dreamscape as well. And I'm going to explain a little more as to why in a moment here. But basically what happens next is it's explained simply that all 3 of them, Mac, Keegan, and Lonnie, have been potted and taken out of the pods. It's actually a mission on their behalf to actually purposely get captured, potted, so they can get taken to the very heart of the hive. And that's really interesting here. We can see that Mac is wearing this weird contraption on his mouth that I'm pretty sure helps him and keeps him from getting fully taken over. That's my thought. If you recall in Gears 4, when Marcus was taken out of the pod, he basically had to throw up a lot of this weird liquid that was in his lungs, in his body, and he almost looked pretty much dead at first. But I'm pretty sure if he had that type of contraption, that would have prevented that. So I'm pretty sure that's the whole point of it. Probably when you're potted, you're forced to ingest that weird liquid. It probably helps with you transforming, and this contraption probably simply prevents that. But anyways, as we can see here, all 3 of them are setting up these bombs that are being set in the very center of the hive. And the thing that's really interesting that they discuss here in this particular part of the comic is they state the fact that when you're in a pod, when you're in stasis like that, you are actually all connected to the extent that you see each other in that dreamscape. You actually can see each other and interact with one another while being in that dreamscape. So that's the thing that's really interesting. And the one thing that makes me think so too is if you notice in the previous picture, I'll put it right back up, we can see in the dreamscape he's right there by himself, and Keegan and Lonnie are standing there, but they look weird. They look like almost dead or something, like they're not really there. And then shortly after that happens, we can see him get pulled out of the pod. To me, I theorize that the reason why they look all crusty and dead like that is maybe they were in the pod in that dreamscape with him, but the second that they escaped inside that dreamscape, whoever you may be with, if they escape, they probably turn like that because the connection, or whatever you want to call it, is gone. So that's the one thing. I'm just simply theorizing. That's one thing I just wanted to point out, because one thing I noticed. But essentially, they kind of made jokes about how Lonnie was wearing a pretty bright dress and that Keegan was shirtless for whatever reason. So that's the one thing that's kind of weird. Like, when they're in that dreamscape, they see each other and interact with one another, but it's not exactly the same. They're, like, as they say, in a dream, so weird things can happen as well. But anyways, we can see that they're making their way out of the hive, and as they're making their way, they're stepping through and simply just trying to escape, because they notice that there is no swarm nearby. They're in the middle of the hive, the heart of this hive, and there's no enemies, so it's really weird. But as they're making their way, you can notice they keep stepping on these weird tentacles on the ground, and it kind of zooms out, and we can see that all these tentacles are connecting to what look like the swarm, and even Locust drones. We can see that they're wearing the Locust armor, and with them stepping on the tentacles, it awakes them. So it's probably like a spider web effect is what I would probably think. And what I mean by that is, in real life, if there's a spider and something lands on its web, they can sense it and they want to attack. So maybe that's kind of like the same thing here, where they were all asleep, all in this part of the hive, but with them stepping on the tentacles, it kind of announced their position and woke up this locust and this swarm. I just want to say that is definitely locust drones right there. There's no way that isn't. You can see they look exactly like drones. They got the dang armor. So that right there kind of shows to me that the swarm are probably taking these dead crystallized locusts and somehow reviving them. That's just the only thing I just really wanted to point out as well. But as soon as the bombs are about to go off, we can see that the swarm do emerge, and they start attacking all three of them, and they have to fight their way out, and they are completely surrounded. There's really no way that they can escape, and they're just fighting their way, trying to survive, and the bombs finally take off. And what the bombs really are, in the sense here, is that they're not actually the type of bombs that explode or have fire or anything like that. They are actually acid, and we can see the green smoke, the green liquid just flying everywhere as soon as the bombs went off. And now we can see they're making their way, and it looks hopeless, but as they're fighting the swarm, some of the acid is taking effect, and it is killing quite a bit of the swarm. But the bomb can kill them too, because, well, the bomb isn't going to be able to tell the difference between friend or foe, so they're trying to make their way, make their escape. And they kind of push up to kind of this weird center part of the hive that's pretty much like a little mountain per se, and we can see all the swarm dying by this acidic bomb. And as they're trying to make their escape, luckily they call for air support, and they're able to be taken away and saved by a pilot known as Tak. I'm going to talk a little bit more about him in a moment here, because there's kind of a little bit of a theory I have behind Tak as well. But anyways, they make their escape, and they actually go back to a nice peaceful home for a debriefing, and we find out that the home is actually owned by none other than Victor Hoffman. And Hoffman actually put them up for this mission to go about killing a swarm hive, pretty much a new idea for a weapon that can kill the swarm, which is this acidic bomb. And the whole reason for them being chosen for this mission is they were kind of, in a sense, a little bit kind of like Marcus, where they were prisoners and deemed unworthy to be part of the cog, etc. And this was kind of like their redemption mission, and they luckily were able to do it successfully. So now they're pretty much redeemed and free and good to go about their lives. And then the one thing that's kind of funny here is we can see that the woman here standing next to Hoffman, her name is Hannah. And Hannah kind of had this thing where she wanted to do this mission. She wanted to find out if this would work, but she kind of made this joke about saying that sending them to do this was kind of like throwing blind babies into a wood chipper, because of how bad of this situation it could really be. It's just 3 people thrown into a hive. And she was really against it because she thought that it wouldn't work, but at the same time she did want it to work. So it's kind of like this weird little confrontation with Hoffman. But now that it was proven to work and everything, they were happy. And Hoffman basically tells Lonnie and Keegan that they can go about and do whatever they want. The cool thing is that Keegan is actually shown to, I believe he must have been a Onyx Guard, because he mentions that he's pretty much been given his rank back and he wants to go talk to a previous comrade that was in the Onyx Guard. And then Lonnie here is stated that she's going to be reinstated as a sergeant for the cog, so she's just going to go about being a cog soldier as well. And right when they're about to leave, Hoffman tells them that he has one more mission for Mac, but the other two don't have to do it. And essentially what this mission is, they're going to do pretty much the same thing. Go to a certain area, destroy the swarm hive that's there. And the whole point of doing these missions is because they have a theory that once a hive is killed, that any swarm that have spawned from it will die as well, because of the simple fact that when it comes to the swarm and their connection to a certain hive, it's pretty much of this weird connection where the heart of the hive acts as a quasi-central nervous system, as they say in the comic. I just simply quoted that particular part. So essentially, when this nervous system, this heart, is cut out, any connecting swarm that spawned from it, even if they're miles away from it, can die. So that's one big weakness that they're trying to exploit with the swarm. By killing these hives, it kills the swarm. So that's the really big thing about this mission, and they probably will explore this later on in Gears 5, I'm hoping. I hope they bring this up in the new games. But anyways, what the mission simply is here is that they're going to go to a city that actually Mac grew up in. It's his hometown. And the reason why he was chosen was because of that particular fact that he used to live there, and kind of giving Mac a chance to avenge his fallen family, his fallen comrades, etc. that lived in that city before it was taken over by the swarm. And luckily for him, Keegan and Lonnie decide, hey, we're going to go with him. We're a squad. We're Scorpio, is what they say. That's the name of their squad. So they want to continue working with him and help him out in this particular case. So they're going to go with him. Before we go on that part, I actually just want to discuss kind of a few things here about the comic that they established real fast before we get to the final part of it. Essentially, the one thing I wanted to point out is we can see that the helicopter pilot that works with Hoffman here, the one that saved their lives, his name is Tak. So the one thing that kind of weirds me out here is that Hoffman actually had a comrade that he knew even from the Pendulum Wars, known by the name of Bai Tak, an indie that helped him out in the war as a part of a COG sniper. And he was a really interesting character, but we only saw him in the comics. He was talked about in novels. And Bai Tak was the character, and now we got this new character by the name of Tak. So one thing I'm thinking is this character is probably the son of Bai Tak, and he works with Hoffman, especially because of the fact that he actually calls Hoffman uncle. So that's the one thing that's really interesting. So I think maybe Bai Tak probably eventually had a kid, and he enlisted in the COG, and now he works with Hoffman because he knew his dad. So that's just one thing I just kind of wanted to point out, just a little interesting fact there. Next thing here I wanted to point out as well is that earlier, like I stated, we see that Mac got hit by the spike from the Snatcher, but yet we never see anything about it later on. We don't see no wound. He wakes up from the pod perfectly fine. So there's something kind of interesting going on there. I kind of want to know if that's either inconsistency or if it was something that they kind of wanted to kind of establish without to see if anyone could notice. So pretty much the one thing I wanted to point out is earlier in the comic, before this particular part, is shortly after they escape the pods, earlier in the comic, there's a quick little discussion between Mac and Lonnie, and the thing that's really weird here is she says about the swarm attack we saw, and he goes, yeah, it was real, or parts of it anyway. So kind of like saying, like, was that fight we saw at the beginning of the comic real, or is that kind of like maybe the dreamscape, maybe they already were in there, and him getting hit by the spike might have just been something that happens when you're in there, when you start getting taken over. Who knows? It's kind of weird, because if you notice, once again, when he came out of the pod, he didn't have a wound. So it's just kind of weird that that happened and we don't see no damage on him whatsoever. And then they even mentioned the fact that parts of the battle that we saw at the comic was real. So they probably were in the dreamscape even at the beginning of the comic. So that's the one thing I just really wanted to point out. Next thing, we can see that they actually get to the city that that Mac lived in, and now they're going to go ahead and try to save the city, or necessarily kill all the swarm that's living in it to liberate it. We refer to this town as Croa, and as they arrive, they mention the fact that they couldn't really just land at the very top of the area. They kind of have to make their way through town because of the way the mountain and the area is. It kind of forces them to go through a certain path in between the town and another village. Throughout the comic, we can see that Mac and Lonnie have a little bit of a good friend relationship here. They're really good friends, and they kind of talk to each other about their past. One thing that was stated earlier in the comic was that Lonnie, she actually is in India, of course. We can see she has a tattoo similar to like Ty, but she was never born or raised on an island. So she was actually born most likely in the nation of Tyrus on Cog soil. And everyone always asks her while she's growing up, what island are you from? And she's like, I was born here. So it's kind of just like one little interesting thing that they mention. And then they also go on here as well regarding Mac, that it's kind of a weird thing. I don't know why they brought this up in the comic, but apparently Mac has red hair exactly like his uncle. And I don't know if he's joking or if he's serious, but he's probably serious. But he states the fact that growing up he always wanted to be a cook like his uncle. He looks like his uncle, and he has the same red hair as his uncle. And it turns out that he was actually his uncle's actually his dad. Basically, what I was gonna say is that his mom cheated on his dad with the uncle, and he's actually his uncle's son, but yet he was raised by his mom's husband, which is his dad. So it's kind of like weird. Like basically he had a dad and a mom, but he's actually his uncle's son. So it's kind of like a weird thing. And his dad hated his uncle because of what happened, that his wife cheated on him and had a son with him basically, but he still raised them. So that's kind of like the weird thing. And then later on, while they're making their way through Croa, they mention the history of this area. Essentially, long story short, his father and other ex-Cog soldiers left the army after the Human Locust War and created their own home separate from the Cog because they wanted to get away from all the drama and everything. But I guess it didn't really work out too well for them, seeing as them being away from the Cog kind of helped with them getting taken over and killed by the swarm. The very last thing we see is while they're walking through this area, we see a statue of Mac, and it shows him with children, almost like he's like a fabled celebrity or something like that while living in this area before what happened. And he kind of just says, oh, that's a long story, and then that's where the comic ends. So overall, Mac is returning back to his original city, his original home, to essentially kill the Hive that had attacked and killed everyone he cared about. And that's pretty much the very first issue of the Gears of War Hivebusters. And actually, one last thing I want to mention is that the acidic bomb was also called the Hivebuster. So that's why they're calling it this, in the name of the comic. But yeah, guys, I just want to bring you guys this awesome video talking about the very first issue of Gears of War Hivebusters, simply a comic book that takes place after Gears 4 but before Gears 5, showing off these new characters in Team Scorpio. If you guys like this video, please definitely hit that like button and subscribe, and please definitely hit that notification bell so you guys can be notified whenever I make a video. Anyways, guys, tell me what you guys think, and thanks for watching, guys. Take it easy. Thanks for watching this video. If you want to see my most recent Gears of War video, hit that link on the left. If you want to see any of my other content, hit that link on the right. Thanks for watching, guys.